Welcome to the first episode in the Bullhorn Basics webinar series for 2025, which is on automation data health. And that is how you can use automation to test and improve the health of data in your Bullhorn ATS instance. So I have had the pleasure to work directly with many of today's participants, but for those of you who don't know me, hello, I'm Susan Whalen, a customer success specialist for Bullhorn overlay products such as analytics, onboarding talent platform, and my biased favorite, automation. In customer success, our mission is to help you unlock value from your Bullhorn tech stack. I've been with Bullhorn for over 3 years and am very excited to deliver this presentation today. Also, I'd like to call out that during today's presentation, I'll be sharing a demo environment, so all data is for demonstration purposes only. During today's webinar, we'll define data health, cover common causes of data health issues, and most importantly, ideas to resolve them, and hopefully sharing some tips along the way. So how do we define data hygiene? Well, as it relates to your Bullhorn ATS, we can define it as ensuring your database contains information that is accurate, error-free, correctly formatted, and complete. Why does that matter? Well, it certainly impacts your ability to find the right information and to find it quickly. Dirty, incomplete data will populate your searches, with the wrong records. Also, without data integrity, your recruiters and sales teams might look elsewhere to find information they need if they feel they can't trust your own system. This can slow down day-to-day processes, and usually also, when they're looking elsewhere, this comes at a greater cost. That is paying to search other databases for candidates that are already in your Bullhorn ATS. Some common causes of bad data. Well, as we all know, manual data entry can lead to mistakes in spelling, capitalization, accuracy, and these mistakes can add up. Missing, incorrect, or inconsistent data, as we just noted, can prevent the right records from appearing in your searches and/or automations. Noncompliance is often an issue. Many of you may be familiar or have experienced that even if you make a field mandatory and it's a picker field, some recruiters might simply select the first option every time, regardless of whether it's correct, and then move on. We hope that that doesn't happen, but I hear about it quite often. And then also, we have to be concerned about uploading information from external sources, and it's either inaccurate, missing data, or gets populated into the wrong fields. We'll go over that a little bit more in just a minute. All right, let's talk solutions. We're going to look at auditing your database. Let's take a few moments to talk about duplicate records, how we can capture missing data, and then talk about governance, for data health. Okay, so we're going to start out by evaluating the state of your ATS system. Going to talk about whether your data is usable. Let's examine how we can determine, do you have missing or invalid contact information, email, phone numbers, things like that. Also, it's helpful to take a look at the source of your missing or bad data. It could be human error, but then also often we upload candidate or client records into our ATS in bulk from a CSV file. And that can be, via your API, LinkedIn, for example. and thereby importing records with missing or incomplete information. And then sometimes that data can also be mapped to the wrong fields. We're also going to take a look at, in addition to capturing missing information or correcting bad information, how you can use automation to keep your data health clean by process automations. And we're going to look at the example of a job-based automation. So I'm going to switch over to the demo environment. Okay, and I think you can all see the contacts menu in the demo environment. So this menu, contacts, contains all of your candidate and sales contacts. It's a listing of all of them, and you can examine information in this menu by conducting an advanced search. For any of those who missed it, we're over here on the right-hand side, clicking on the advanced search button. And you'll note that it looks a heck of a lot like if you were building a list in the list menu or building a list on the fly in the enrollment step while building an automation. And you're right, it's exactly the same. And it is another place where you could build a list. For example, this is just a little tip-all demo. If you're looking at candidate status, and I'm just selecting candidates records that have a status, and they should all have one. If we conduct the search, all of those candidate records will populate into the screen. If you scroll down to the bottom of the first or any of those pages with those results, you can export the results. I was talking about building a list, but sorry, just got segued for a minute. You can export the results to a CSV file. It only previews a couple of fields for the records in this screen, but if you export the results to a CSV file, you'll get a whole host of field information for each record, and you can use that to examine your results. But I was alluding to, if you conduct a search, if you come over here, you can save a search as a list. Probably it's going to be always updated, and you can do that here. Okay, so switching back over. Let's look at whether we have usable or missing information in any fields. Once again, I'd mentioned taking a look at candidate records. In this case, as I mentioned previously, when you first come into the contacts menu, it's all of your records, be they candidate or sales contact. But let's say we want to take a look at those that are just your candidate records. And if you simply or initially just click on the candidate entity, you don't get a count of the total number of candidates that match the search. You don't get a count of those records yet. You have to start listing some criteria. And since all of your candidate records should have a status, that's how you can get an initial count. You can also look for an error state for candidate records that do not have a status. In this demo environment, there's 24 of them. That should never happen. So if you find that to be the case in your instance, you can conduct the search, have those records file into the search, go down to the bottom, export the results to a CSV file, and take further examination of why that is the case. But back to what we're trying to achieve here. So we've got about 160,000 candidate records in this demo environment. So let's take a look at those that we can't contact. Perhaps let's start with via their email address. If we can select does not have email. Okay, not too bad. Only about 8,000. What about those that don't have an email address and they also don't have a phone number? By default, in your instance, phone number one, the phone number one field is what populates here. And if you have both, a cell phone and a business or a home phone, whatever's in the first field is what's going to show here. So in this particular case, we have about 1,700 candidate records that don't have an email address and they don't have a phone number. So we can't contact them at all. So you might want to consider using this as the enrollment criteria, the list logic, to enroll in an automation and set the status of all of those records to something like archived or, uncontactable if you choose to create a custom status. And then in the future, you can go about remediating those records on the ATS side, deleting them. Or if there's any other reason that you want to keep them as is, but omit them from future automations, you don't want these records running through automations, you can save it as a list, in this case, uncontactable records, and use it as a suppression list in automations so that any records in that list will never be used. They'll be suppressed from running in an automation. So that's one idea. You can also look at whether or not data is valid. For example, if in your email address field, there's no @ symbol, clearly that's an invalid email address. And in this case, even for all of those records that have an email address, there's almost a little over 151,000 for which that address is invalid, can't email them to them anyway. So that's another criteria you could add in your description. You could change it to a grouping where, if you want to test for either of those conditions, it could be does not have email, or the email address does not contain, the @ symbol. So all of your candidate records that have one or the other of these error conditions. Okay. I had mentioned we could take a look at what is the source of bad data. For example, let's try. I'm going to just try this example again. Regardless, I'm just using the example of does not have an email address, but regardless of what error state you're referring to, any field that's missing information that's key to a search you're conducting, you can look at the source of the record. In our demo environment, we don't have those that are typical that you would probably see in yours. For yours, you might see sources like LinkedIn or Indeed, and that in that manner, you can see which of your sources are producing records with the highest error state. That can be helpful as well. Or which recruiters, if you look at the record owner, which recruiters might be creating records that have consistent errors in them, and then use that information to have a chat with the recruiter, perhaps run them through some retraining, or just also share the importance of those fields being populated and being populated correctly. And I wanted to share with you an example of, in addition to searching for errors and omissions, and by the way, although it's coming soon, at the moment, searching for errors and omissions in this manner in automation is something that's available only in automation. That is not available in ATS in terms of searching for the presence or absence of data. You can't do that in ATS. And or whether you're missing something like a character like the @ symbol. So automation is particularly helpful in that regard. Okay, so what about situations where you have jobs and they were added a while ago? Let's just arbitrarily select 90 days ago, 3 months ago. So they were added 3 months ago. They are still in a status, the job record is still in a status where it's, say, accepting candidates. You could either use the criteria is not and exclude those you don't want to include. You might have a couple of categories that would make sense, or just use the inclusive criteria. And you can also test, so we've got jobs 3 months old, the status is still accepting candidates as opposed to placed. You could just work with that alone, or you could also add in submission criteria. And say, and test for those that do not have any submissions within the last 3 months. So job added 3 months ago, still out there accepting candidates, and there's no submissions against it. You could probably assume that you could close these jobs. In this case, in the demo environment, there's just about 218 of them. So you could create a job-based automation. And if you were in the context menu searching for those records, and then you saved that search as a list, then you could select that list here, or just create it on the fly in the automation. But sorry, as a best practice, let's just add a 1 hour wait step. Hang on a second. Okay. There we go. We'll just add a 1 hour wait step, give everything time to sync, and then, all right, is it me, or do I have a gremlin in my system at the moment? All right, so let's just say we've gone ahead and added that wait step, which is showing here. Well, this is fun. And as I mentioned, for any of those records, you could set job is open to no, and thereby auto close any jobs that are in that error state that should no longer be open. And you could also, if you're using it on a job board, you could unpublish the job by switching job as public to no. Okay. Going to switch back over to my slide deck for a moment. All right, so now let's talk about duplicates. You may have seen some of the knowledge base articles on duplicate records. As in the prior slide, I have referenced some KB articles here on the topics that we're discussing today. And we'll be sure in the follow-up email you receive with the recording that these knowledge base articles are referenced for you there as well. But oftentimes, you might find that you have quite a bit of duplicate records in your instance. And while there's some verbiage that talks about deleting or merging duplicate records in automation, automation can be used to identify them. It can be used to help stop that list from growing. But deleting or merging records, that happens on the ATS side of things. So we'll take a look again at how you can determine duplicate records and stop those records from growing and identifying the source of those records. Okay. Back to the demo environment. How do you identify duplicate records? Well, if you go to into your list menu and you could start typing in duplicate to search, you'll see that you have a duplicate candidates list, a duplicate sales contact list. This one, actually, this one must have been created by someone, and they probably use the criteria in list. So we're going to ignore this one for the time being. But you'll have a duplicate sales contact and candidate records lists. And then also, if you have Enterprise Edition, you would have a duplicate leads list. And these lists say under the type that they're one-time lists, which would perhaps imply that they're static, but they're not. They are always updated lists. They are dynamic and constantly synced and evaluated. So 990 might not seem like such a large number for this demo environment, but I've worked with clients who have thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps even more, hundreds of thousands of duplicate records in their instance, and that can cause, quite a problem. So you can go to the list menu, search for your duplicate lists, and click into them and take a look. So what's particularly interesting, right, is where are those records coming from? How are you creating so many duplicate candidate or sales contact records? And if you want to take a look at that, you can use the activity menu in list. In this case, we're in the candidate entity, it's candidate based list. And if you start typing in duplicate, that's the system generated list. So for records that are in that list, and as we looked before, for for errors and omissions, you could identify the source, where those records are coming from. I've worked with clients who were able to use this search to determine, I think, all right, so in this case, 2 out of 990 duplicate candidate records came from this source in the demo environment. But they've been able to determine in their own environments that perhaps a very large number of duplicate candidate or sales contacts records were coming from lists that they were scraping from various sources. And they might be paying large amounts of money to those sources for those lists. And you can determine, especially by adding in, say, date record added, to get a sense of how many of those that you're importing you already have in your database. And I've had clients that have turned off those sources to their recruiters, saved quite a bit of money because they already had the bulk of them in their instance already. So that can be very helpful. And let's take a look at how we can stop your duplicate list from getting any bigger. Automation can't do anything about those that already exist. It can identify the source of where they're coming from, but we could stop those lists from getting bigger. Okay, so for the enrollment, we would choose always updated. And the enrollment criteria might only be that the records are in that duplicate list, and let's take a look at those that are being more recently or currently added. So I believe 0 days ago also works in this case, and it will allow you to look at records in real time or allow them to file into this automation. And worst case, you could use 1 day ago, but I do believe that 0 days works. So there's your enrollment criteria. It's giving you a count of 0 at the moment because, perhaps no new records are being added at that particular time. You might also want to include a 1-hour wait step as the best practice to allow records to sync. And then I'm not going to build it out, but then you can simply add a send notification step and notify the record owner, the recruiter, that they've just created a duplicate record, alert them to the fact, and make whatever recommendations you would want to send, that they stop it immediately, that they go back and find its partner, and that they merge the two together, however you want that to direct them to, to manage that situation. Again, just stepping back for a moment, I think that I may have forgotten to mention how duplicate records are identified. It's through the email address field. So if a secondary record is created that has the same email address as one that already exists, that's how those records are created, or identified rather, as duplicates. So with an automation that sends a notification to the recruiter, alerting them to the fact that they've created a duplicate and to take remedial action, you can stop that list from getting any larger. If the first notification doesn't work, you might add a wait step of a day. And if that duplicate record still exists, so it hasn't been kicked out of the automation, send a secondary notification, perhaps not only to the recruiter, but to whomever the recruiter reports to, and asking them to take remedial action. Worst case, You could, if it still exists after a certain period of wait steps, worst case, you could then use an update step to change the status of that record to, say, archive, and omit it from certain automations moving forward, and or using it in an automation, or populating a list, downloading it to a CSV file to share with someone who might work on remediating that situation later on, or deleting those records. For those of you that have very large numbers of existing duplicate records, while automation again can't remediate those that already exist, you could look at our partner marketplace. Some of our partners offer some really great tools to identify, use this list to identify and either merge or remove your duplicate records in bulk. So you might engage them to do that for the historical records, and then build your own automation to prevent that from happening moving forward. Okay. I'll hop back over to my slide deck. And talk about how we can go about capturing missing data from candidate or sales contact records. So under your engagements menu, and engagements refers to either surveys, or if you have Enterprise Edition, chats, which are can be in and of themselves surveys. But you can use surveys, send them in an automation via text or via email to those contacts, and ask them to remediate that missing or erroneous information for you. The list logic would include, records that are in that error state, and the messaging could, something like, hey, could you please just share your most recent or your best contact email address with us. If you didn't have one at all, you could text that survey to the recipient. You have the phone number, but you don't have the email address, or vice versa, and get them to update that information in those fields for you. Again, without going into detail of how to build the surveys themselves, we have terrific knowledge-based articles that detail that for you. You have the option for any survey question of saving the responses back to that particular field in Bullhorn. You can also request that, say, for example, a candidate sends you an updated resume, and using the upload or update resume survey question type, if they comply, if they share the resume with you, then it can run through the parser and update any fields on their record. Another idea is to auto update certain fields based on events that have already happened. For example, post-placement. You've placed a candidate in a role, and you could use the job title from the placement record, which is connected to the job record. You could use the job title on the job record to update the position title on the candidate record moving forward in a placement-based automation centered around perhaps the placement start date. Perhaps you want to give that candidate 30 days, into that role before you make these updates to their record at a 30-day wait step post-placement, and then use an update candidate step to update the position title on the candidate record with the job title from the job record. And of course, you've just placed them, but who knows, perhaps at some point in time down the road, you might be reaching out to them again to see if they're interested for another role. And now you'll have their more recent job title. You could do the same with salary information. You could update the desired salary on the candidate record with the job salary from the job record. So there's a number of fields that exist on the job, / placement record that you might want to use to update the candidate fields on their record after placement. So this is something that can just happen automatically, and you're not reaching out to this candidate for them to update this information themselves. Some of our clients, or I've had clients ask me about doing that based on submission information. The only possible caveat there is sometimes candidates are submitted to a role and certain criteria, they don't meet certain criteria on that record. You just have to pay attention to that off of a placement record as well. So consider that in terms of until they get placed, you might not want to use submission information to update any fields on the record. And then once they are placed, make sure that it's a field that you feel confident that the candidate would have met, and not that they were placed even though they didn't meet one particular criteria that could update one particular field on their record. Let me just switch back to the demo environment for a minute. And also point out that, when you go to add an automation, you can start from scratch, choosing a blank automation, or you can use any one of our blueprints that are available in everyone's instance. And for data health automations, such as, capturing missing candidate data, or using a survey to ask a candidate to update their resume, there are blueprints for either of those options that already exist. And of course, for any blueprint, you select it and you can preview it, you save it, and then it saves that into your instance. It'll add the word copy at the end. You can then modify any of these steps to your content. Change the duration of a wait step, go into the engagement. When you copy one of these blueprints into your instance, it comes over with suggested list logic in the enrollment step, and some great ideas, a good starting point, but you can modify any of those criteria. It'll come over, in this case, with a suggested survey as an example, and you could build your own from scratch and select your newly built engagement as opposed to the one that was provided for you, or modify the example that came over with the blueprint and make it your own. So all of those options exist. Okay. Let's just talk for a few moments about data health and maintaining data health. So hopefully you have an automation team. We find that clients that use automation that have established a team are the most successful with using the tool. And perhaps you may still only have one or a few people that actually engage in building automations. But if you include key stakeholders from the important areas in your organization, sales, recruitment, marketing, executive level, to decide what types of automations you want to build, which ones you want to give priority to, and collaborating on the process, what that automation is going to look like, and make sure that it works from everyone's viewpoint. That if that team is also involved with governing or maintaining, establishing protocol for the health of the data of your database, that tends to be the most successful approach. So we talked earlier about how you can identify for records that have fields that are in a constant error state, or missing information or bad information, particularly that option where a recruiter in a picker field, it might be mandatory, but they just select that first option. Actually, I want to show you how you can look at that really quickly. I'm going to pop over there for a moment. But you can see which recruiters might be, or just by mistake, engaging in that practice. Okay, so let's just say again, it's something like, the email address doesn't contain the @ symbol. Someone's consistently forgetting to do that, right? So you can see out of those, sorry, I'm gonna just to get a count, a little over 8,000. You could see that for those recruiters, you could look at them one by one. If that makes sense, you can go through that practice of seeing exactly which recruiters are responsible for creating the highest number of records with a particular error state, and then use that information to go back to the recruiter and just work on some retraining. I find that if you not only share with the recruiter, this information, pointed out to them, they may or may not have already known about it, that if you can share with them how they're going to benefit from correcting that error or not continuing to make that error moving forward, share with them how that information is used in automations to save them time, in marketing emails, outreaches that are going to, generate leads and, down the line revenue for them. That if you get buy-in, that tends to be the most successful approach for compliance. And just lastly, one other item to think about when discussing data health with your recruiters is, and with the automation team, is come up with some standards so that you have consistent information in particular fields. For example, mailing addresses. Do you use abbreviations for street, ST, or are you spelling street out? For phone numbers, are you using dashes or parentheses? And similarly for titles, are they spelling out administrator or abbreviating it to admin? You can identify some, any fields that have the potential to have multiple types of entries where it might cause a problem, and come up with your standards and move forward from there. Also, when you're sending surveys out to contacts, candidates or sales contacts, asking them to update information, and it's for a free text field, for example, a phone number, you can give them an example. When you're typing the question out, you can put in parentheses an example of the suggested format you'd like them to follow. If you would prefer that they use just hyphens when they enter a phone number, you can show them that example, and that can help with consistency even when it's not your own internal recruiters that are filling in that information.